The Square Ball Podcast.
Welcome to our weekly update. We'll catch up with the very latest from Elland Road. Dan here with Michael and Moscow in a show that's brought to you with Levi Solicitors, who will offer you a 10% discount on your legal fees. levisolicitors.co.uk/the square ball to investigate that. Do you think, Michael?
Investigate it?
Yeah.
What are you investigating?
See what services they offer. You can satisfy your curiosity, because I know you talk about the big three, the wills, the probate, the conveyancing. Loads more on there, such as...
Yeah, things for your business.
Yeah.
Things for you personally.
Award-winning?
Award-winning, all of it, probably. Certainly certain aspects of it have won awards. I don't know about all of it, but if there were awards for all of it...
It deserves that, doesn't it?
Probably would win them.
Yeah, levisolicitors.co.uk/the square ball for something far more professional than Michael's delivery of that particular read. You shrugging? Not bothered? Not interested in helping Levi's?
No, I think I do a good job for them. I think I do a good job for those guys. And if they need
what I like is you've come in again and made it about you.
And if they need any help with any of the legal stuff, I can probably lend a hand there too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I will let them know.
I also might not.
Yeah.
Just to reassure anyone who's thinking of using their services.
Yeah. Okay. Moving into the weekly update then. And the big news as well, former Leeds manager Terry Venables died. There was a minute's applause at Elland Road on Wednesday ahead of the Swansea game to pay tribute to him. Not a huge impact at Elland Road, at a really difficult time for Leeds, as the start of the decline was it was all unfolding there in the background, was it? And we saw little bits of it, none more so than the very famous eye roll and the look to the heavens as Peter Ridsdale leaned in on the desk to tell everybody that we'd sold Jonathan Woodgate from under Terry Venables' nose. Yeah, I don't look back on it with the fondest of memories, that time. But I do know from when we've spoken about this before and reading interviews, hearing interviews with former players who said it was actually a dead good time behind the scenes. Like, they enjoyed his coaching and training and stuff like that.
Olivier Dacour, in particular. Nigel Martin, big fan.
Bezzies?
Yeah, I think it's the football side. I think there were signs, particularly at the start of the season, when we beat Manchester City on the opening day and we had some good results and we were playing different formation and quite modern looking, that he was still a very good coach. I mean, we have the distinction of it was his last full-time lead management gig in football. And he was still pretty good at that part, but I think the problems the phrase he always used was that it didn't look like the brochure he had been shown, which was the starting point that he would wanted to build a team about Rio Ferdinand. And then when he told Rio Ferdinand that, Rio Ferdinand was like, well, what about me signing for Man United though? Because I'm doing that. And then the other side of that was that Rio was supposed to stay, and then players like Olivier Dacour, Lee Bowyer, Gary Kelly, and then Robbie Keane, who in the end did go before he went in September to Spurs, were all supposed to be sold, and they all ended up staying. So like the beginnings of the him versus Olivier Dacour thing was he was supposed to be in Italy and ended up being kept. So everything behind the scenes was not, I think, anything that Venables was prepared for. And looking back at that famous press conference that's kind of the moment when it all came to a head in January, when Woodgate was sold, and the idea was that if we sold Robbie Fowler to Manchester City, we would keep Woodgate, but we ended up selling Robbie Fowler to Manchester City for probably, like, we were almost paying them to take him away, and then Woodgate was going as well. And it was the point where I think it was unavoidable problems. And looking back at the press conference, I wrote about it for the blog, that you can at the time, because it was broadcast on lunchtime on Sky Sports News, and I remember we left work to go in a bar and watching these unbelievable scenes, and the camera is on Ridsdale and Venables sitting side by side, and there was a way of looking at the time like, these two wankers, they're taking us down. But then when you look at it again, knowing with more hindsight, and you watch Venables' body language throughout, that wasn't the only time. I think he spent most of it rolling his eyes, gritting his teeth, grimacing, looking like he wanted to kill Ridsdale. He was I think, almost on our side a little bit. We could feel Ridsdale was very much the cornered person in that press conference. And it's only sort of with retrospect that you realise, I think, Venables was learning about things probably not very long before we were learning about things.
It did essentially mirror the fan experience of that time, because we came out of the World Cup thinking, well, Rio Ferdinand might go here because he's been England's best player at the World Cup, but we're still going to have a really good team. We'll still probably be like Champions League-ish, UEFA Cup maybe, and then it just so very quickly unravelled. It was obvious. It was obvious from quite early on that no one was staying, or if they were staying, it's because we couldn't get rid of them.
Yes.
Venables was a bit of a coup at the time because
I was pleased at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was that thing of because David O'Leary had just been given the job because he was there essentially, and he was caretaker after George Graham quit. Did really well with all the kids. Got the feeling like something special was happening. And when Martin O'Neill wouldn't come, it was kind of like, well, obvious choice. Whereas this was the time. It's like he had kind of that era had got us to the point where somebody like Terry Venables. It sounds daft with his reputation, and people kind of look at him in different ways. The idea that we could attract Terry Venables.
Yeah.
Like when George Graham took over from Howard Wilkinson, he was the new owner's mates, but also he'd been out of football for 18 months after being found guilty of taking illegal payments for an agent. So it was essentially like, who's going to take a chance on George Graham? Excellent manager, like great track record at Arsenal, but a bit tainted. Whereas Venables was just kind of like, oh, we're shopping off of the, we're shopping in a good supermarket here. And so it felt like it should have been. O'Leary took us as far as he could with the kind of the bluster and the charisma and the letting the kids do what they want. Now we're getting, and this is kind of what a lot of the players said happened in training. Now we're getting a proper, knowledgeable football manager with a great track record for Barcelona in England, who should then take us to the next level and we'll win something. Didn't turn out that way.
It didn't, did it? No, I remember that. It went a bit different. That's how I remember. Just speaking of George Graham, I think if there was a little bit of suspicion around Venables, well, I was the same, thinking, oh, this is exciting. Former England manager, he's got a reputation. You know, he's someone we've heard of. He's got profile. But in many ways, the profile worked against him to an extent, I think. Maybe if we look back at George Graham leaving us for Spurs because the bright lights of London appealed to him more, and he can't, although George Graham is Scottish, he was very much synonymous with London and obviously Arsenal. And there was a little bit of that with Venables as well. He was kind of exotic, wasn't he? Because he was based in London. He's doing the travel programs. He'd been at Barcelona. And there was a sense that we'd kind of pulled this sort of almost magnetic figure out of London and up north here into the provinces. And you wonder if maybe from a cultural point of view or a suspicion point of view, it never quite 100% married up because we were very much, I guess, cast in the identity of Howard Wilkinson, who's a Yorkshireman. He's quite a dour personality, and when you stack Venables up against Wilkinson personality-wise, never mind the footballing records, but the personality-wise, like oil and water, wasn't it, to an extent?
I think if it had worked on the pitch, I think you get over that quite quickly.
Yeah.
It's like you could look at Bielsa arriving at Leeds and say, oh, this doesn't look at all like it'll work. If Bielsa ends differently, you go back and look at that and say, oh, well, it was always going to be tough. Someone coming in, didn't even speak English, you kind of would retrospectively fit it, wouldn't you? Whereas, at the time, I just had nice memories of Venables from Euro 96, basically, and thought he might do well.
He was the most Cockney of Cockneys, though.
Yeah.
And I think that's why things turned against him quite quickly, because it was like, well, it's like, if this goes well, nobody will worry about it. But I think it shortened the amount of time he had before things went wrong. And he'd left... the reason he gave for leaving Middlesbrough was because it was too far from his media work in London. So there was this big starting point of like, well, he'll just be on the train down to London every week. How long is he actually going to spend here? And in terms of like a cultural fit, I think that inbuilt Yorkshire suspicion of Cockneys with wheelbarrows selling whatever they've got to sell, because he's the business side of him as well. When he was banned from being a company director at that time because he'd been to the High Court and kind of decided not to go through with the charge. So just ban me for the stuff he'd had at Spurs, where he tried to buy Spurs. Alan Sugar had bought it. He'd gone in as Alan Sugar's chief executive while also managing the football team. So in a way, there was sort of like an idea of him and Peter Ridsdale being a little bit too similar in some ways. Like the phrase I used in the blog post I wrote about Venables was that you can't kid a kid for long. Ridsdale still wanted Martin O'Neill, but Martin O'Neill wanted to stay at Celtic for the last year of his contract. So everyone's like, go talk to Terry Venables. So he went and talked to Terry Venables, didn't really want him, but got charmed, and then charmed him back, sold Venables, all this stuff. It's a great club. The academy's amazing. The club will be brilliant. Rio Ferdinand, build a team around him. We've got to sell these other people. You have money to spend. and got him in. So he kind of sold it to Venables in the way that Venables would sell himself to you. So you've got two people kind of charming each other into a situation that I don't think either particularly was into. And there was a break. He was given a 2-year contract, but there was a break clause after one, because I think Ridsdale was kind of like, oh, if Martin O'Neill wants it in a year, then I can get rid of this Cockney and then he'll come in. But then I think Ridsdale might have been able to do that with somebody else. But when you look at that press conference, when he's talking about Woodgate leaving, Venables is not just some starry-eyed football coach. He's not Dave Ockaday. You know, he's not Steve Evans, who will do everything that Massimo Cellino said. And it's like, yeah, Sam Byram's tearing this club apart. He's been a chief executive. He's worked overseas. He's managed at every level. He's run businesses of all kinds, run them badly and illegally in some cases. And so you, as Peter Ridsdale, are not going to be able to tell Terry Venables anything that he can't deal with. And so there was like it turned into who is kind of holding the cards here, and some of the bits in that press conference, which we did a whole extra ball about that press conference, watching it back, I'm sure. And it was the bits where Venables is being asked, would you demand Peter Ridsdale's resignation to stay here? And he's like, would I demand it? No. And there's a real power play, and there's a scenario in which he does demand that, and Terry Venables takes over as chief executive, and he runs the club because he had the ability to do that, which I think up until that time Ridsdale had kind of been used to being the most like the operator in most scenarios, and part of what led to Leeds United's downfall at the time was Peter Ridsdale getting in over his head with people who had more experience than he did, and it was probably pretty easy for Venables. In the end, he got sacked. Didn't matter. Whereas Peter Ridsdale had more at stake. But yeah, I think the thing I said in the end of this blog was that if Venables and a Leeds fan, if you imagine us ever sitting down for a pint with him and going, what was Leeds all about? We'd probably say pretty much the same things. I think there would be probably some sympathy between his experiences and our experiences, that at the time it was pretty poisonous with Venables, like the chance for him to go. But the passage of time and learning more and seeing what happened since, and you know, the goldfish weren't even known about at that time, and all the kind of the true extent of the rot behind the scenes. I think you would probably now sit down with him and say, like, mutual agreement that was all. It was all just a bad idea, really.
I like you, Michael. Euro 96 is what this made me think of. I spent a lot of time on Sunday because we played on the Friday night. I mentioned on one of the other shows, played on the Friday night, so kind of game was out of my system by Saturday, and then this news arrived on Sunday morning. So I just kind of spent a lot of time just sort of mooching about on Sunday, thinking about Euro 96, because I turned 18 in May 96. So that summer, the tournament was spent first time legally, properly in pubs, watching just... Well, it was great, wasn't it? Because it was at the height of Britpop as well. So you had this whole cultural movement happening here, you know, political change in the air, all that kind of stuff. It was a really good time, I remember, and it always feels like a good time when you're looking back on being 18 years old and your sort of formative experiences. But it was brilliant. I remember sort of finishing my A-levels and finishing sixth form, and me and my mate James, after school, kind of kicked out, just going and playing pool most afternoons in the pub. And then about a month or so later, Euro 96 starts, and it was a real sea change moment for English football, wasn't it? And obviously England doing well in the tournament helped everybody. But yeah, proper halcyon days, salad days stuff when I look back on it. And I was getting quite like misty-eyed about the whole experience. It
was my first tournament I fully remember as well, because I'm a bit younger than you. I'm 39 now, so I'd obviously had a very, very vague memory of Italia 90, and then Euro 92 passed me by because England didn't do very well. But then 94, England weren't there, so it was kind of Big Jack's Island. So this was my first England.
You mean
tournament.
USA 94, not Euro 94, but
USA 94. I mean, sorry, yeah. This was my first England tournament, really, of properly following it and watching all the games and getting into it. And England at that time, that's probably fair to say, meant a lot more to me than they do now. Mm-hmm. Like, I was absolutely devastated when we lost that semi-final at the time. I went and had a little cry in the garden. I was a child.
Well, that was the night. Some slack. That was the night of my sixth form. It wasn't a prom so much as like it was like a leaving party where they gave out awards at the end of the year. But it was the goodbye party before we all went our separate ways and went off to like university or into work or whatever it was. And they were trying to hold this party and do announcements and give out these prizes and awards and stuff. And at that time, we were back at, the old-fashioned little square tellies. And I remember it was in the Queen's Hotel in Bradford. And there were 2 tellies over by the bar. So there was a stage at one end where they were trying to do everything, but everybody was just clustered around the bar over at the far end of the room with these 2 tellies in these 2 corners at the opposite end of the room. Nobody paid any heed to what was going on behind.
And it'll have been like a 20-inch telly as well.
Yeah, that's it. So we were all kind of squinting, trying to see what was going on, but we all got so wrapped up in that. And then I remember later on that night when England failed to get through, usual sad story in extra time and penalties and all that, we all mooched into a nightclub and sort of said our final farewell. So again, it was a very, very prominent night in my sort of growing up formative experiences. That one, I can still remember it to this day.
Yeah, less memorable experiences of his Leeds time, I have to say. It was mainly just a feeling of watching a football club drop to pieces. Yeah, was that? But I mean,
is it any wonder we're damaged?
I know. I think it's a little bit. I did actually feel quite sad about this at the time. I think maybe it's. Is
it a lost youth thing as well?
Maybe partly, and I know Billy Bremner died while I was a Leeds fan and alive, but I never saw him manage Leeds. So it was kind of. I've never seen a Leeds manager I remember die either. So it's a strange thing. One of the first things you first time you experience it, I suppose.
Yeah, as you start to get older and you lose these characters from your childhood. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it was, it made me feel strange at that one on Sunday thinking about it. Absolutely. But all I know is that I tie the thought of Terry Venables far more to Euro 96 than I do to his experience at Leeds. And he was part of, it made me feel connected to something with the England team, I think, that year. And like you say, it's a connection that I don't share now. I kind of keep it at arm's length just for my own well-being, probably, to be perfectly honest. But I'm able to keep that at arm's length. But he made me feel connected to that, and he's very much part of that, central to it. So yeah, I'll not miss him because he's not part of my life. But I like thinking about that memory. It was a nice time in my life.
Yeah, and we'll get to see the clips every time England drop out of a major tournament, which is nice. We'll always get to see him hugging Gareth Southgate, won't we?
Maybe it'll be Gareth Southgate from that moment to lifting the World Cup.
Maybe.
Doing it for Terry.
Moving on to the other news then. We have Brendan Aronson and Rasmus Christensen heading back to West Yorkshire earlier than we expected, but for non-footballing reasons. There have been so many obvious slam dunk jokes that are all very good, by the way, for getting more points while driving than they got on the pitch last season, maybe something like that.
Something along those lines.
But they're both back in court, aren't they? The pair of them for driving offences, be it speeding or what did Aronson do?
And Aronson's ones are a bit more interesting because Rasmus seems like a straightforward speeding. I dare say he wasn't paying attention to the traffic signs. You can kind of see how these things would have occurred.
Although it does say disqualification will be considered just for a speeding offence. He must have been going.
If you go over 100, I think you can get.
It's to do with the extent to which you break the actual posted limit, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
So the A6040. If anybody wants to let us know, if you could, what's a reasonable? I'd hope he wasn't doing 100. From my brief view of Google Maps, I suppose it depends where on it. But under any circumstances, let's just all agree that we should not drive at over 100 miles an hour on British roads.
And Aronson he's 2 offences, and he also
that's quite a lot. Do you think he's going down?
He also might be disqualified.
Come on,
very good.
Thank you.
Yes. So the first one seems fairly benign. It's just for exceeding 30 miles an hour. But the second is for failing to give information relating to the identification of a driver. So,
think he's got confused with his driving licenses, or is he still got his fake college ID for buying beer as a 20-year-old?
Or was someone else he knew driving the car and he's failed to dob them in?
What I think is we probably shouldn't speculate. I'm sure Levi solicitors. I'll be on the bat phone now.
I never betray you, Milana. I'm sure she wasn't driving. Brendan, fill in your paperwork for Christ's sake.
Yeah,
you fool. Although I dare say, if he's banned from driving in England, it's probably not going to be a major issue for him. Ban him for 2 years, 3 years, not going to make any difference, is it?
Yeah, but you'd have to. Yeah, do they? Yeah, I'll be quiet. I don't know enough.
You just hire a driver if you're a footballer, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you probably would.
I mean, I probably would. If I had enough money, I'd play hire one anyway. I wouldn't have to be a footballer to do it. And I think the chances of being a footballer are probably diminishing.
That ship has sailed, do you reckon?
Do you think?
Yeah,
maybe so. Commiserations to the Leeds women who've kept up a fine Leeds United FA Cup tradition and gone out to a shit team. Penalties at Darwin FC. Darwin being a corner of Blackburn, basically.
Yeah, I think shit team is possibly harsh. They might take issue with
Well,
that.
went out to Arsenal last year.
Yeah, the charitable way. Or
I
the
mean,
more,
that's not a proper football team, Darwin.
they were the lowest ranked team still left in the competition, so this was like legitimate giant killing. On penalties, it was a 1-1 draw after extra time, and then there is a very good save from the Darwin goalkeeper on one of the Leeds penalties, and then unfortunately it was a friend of the podcast, Liv Smart, put the decisive one over the bar. So that was the end of it. But one of the big problems for Leeds United women last year was too many cups. And so although playing Arsenal was nice and winning the plate was also great.
Is it the plate? Is it the plate that you go into when you go out of the cup, or is that the trophy? Because I lose track
this is
of it.
separate. So this was the FA Cup. So when you're out the FA Cup, you're out.
Yep.
There is the trophy that becomes a plate, depending on which way round you go. But I'm pretty sure they're just out of that now.
Schrodinger's trophy.
Yeah, and but the problem with the fixtures at the level that Leeds play at is that if there is cup games take priority, and if they get called off, they get scheduled in place of league fixtures, which get bumped down.
Because they ended up with like 12 games in hand or something stupid last season, didn't
exactly.
they? Yeah.
So there are some benefits to not being in it and just concentrating on the league, which is
that is the finest Leeds
thing.
United tradition, isn't it? Like, so we're not going to be in that. We're just going to concentrate on the league
And then finish mid-table.
Yeah, so
Is the right way to do it.
in a way, it's perfect because they won the plate last year, which was the first silverware that they'd won for a long time. So it's good to kind of get that ticked off and sort of get some prove some winning track record, get that back, and then now just get knocked out.
Yeah. Fair enough. I'm enjoying charting the journey. Speaking of journeys, is this your cynicism on our prep sheet here, Michael?
Which bit?
Under the caption, injuries, as we are trying to get promoted back to the Premier League, are we clear of injuries? Is that your question?
Yeah. Well, we seem to be, didn't we?
Well, you've put underneath it, who managed to break themselves last night?
Well, we don't know yet, do we?
Right.
I'm waiting for Farke's press conference where he goes, yes, Sam Byram unfortunately did pick up a knock.
His legs have fallen off. Yeah.
Somerville's shoulder dislocated as he left the pitch, that sort of stuff.
I think Jorginho Rutter got booted in the bollocks at one point.
That did look painful, yeah.
I did notice him cupping himself for quite a long period.
My dad at that point, he said, he went, he's limping. I said, yeah, he's just been whacked in the balls. That's why he's limping.
An abdominal injury.
Yeah.
And then Strauch, I think it was cramp because they gave him, he started stretching out his hamstrings and stuff. And the referee did go to see if he was okay. Seemed very concerned. But he went and had one of those kind of mustard shots that they give to, the subject went viral earlier in the year because there was footage of some players in the National Women's Soccer League in the USA taking them and visibly trying to puke them straight back up. They are horrible, and I wasn't close enough to Strauch to see his facial expression, but he immediately spat it all out and then tried carrying on. It's supposed to, I think the effect of them is like a real weird mix of like mustard powder, chili.
Turmeric's always in these stuff.
Yeah. And the idea is that it is supposed to produce this kind of vomit reaction in you that kind of shocks your muscles back into life. I think that's how it works.
Interesting.
Not a doctor.
You have 20 pints of lager to do that, don't you?
It takes all the life out of the experience. Strong stomach reaction.
I cannot wait because we're going down to the awards, the FSA Awards on Monday next week. So it's going to be a slightly tweaked recording schedule, isn't it, as a result of that. But we will do the recording with Phil on Monday morning before that, and then we're going to get a train down to London and presumably make fools of ourselves. And what time do you reckon you'll vomit? Are you going to save it for getting back to the Premier Inn?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I hope I'll make it back because it's undignified doing it on a street when you're a middle-aged man.
we could do it. We could do a sweepstake, maybe.
I might. You never know. I might just be sensible. It's an option.
Just stick
in Moscow, cowardly not coming down because he's decided he is too old.
I have another observation from last night, apart from Strout being sick. Do you want to hear it? It's a bit of a subject swerve, but kind of related. I'm not saying that hearing about booze reminded me of this, but who was part of Swansea's backroom staff that was on the gantry?
Oh, Bell's knocking about somewhere. There it is. Yep.
Last night with their analytics team. I only recognised him. I think this guy's someone, and then Googled it at half time.
A boozer.
Well, no, let's not do that.
Let's not associate with booze. Why did booze make you think of it?
Because it was an era of Leeds United.
Matthew Jones.
No, Matthew Jones is like the clean living.
I know, but he was around at that time. And he's Welsh.
It's more recent than that.
I was going to say he was doing co-commentary on the day that Pablo scored, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
For the goal.
Yeah. Lee Trundle was knocking around on some commentary.
Andy Robinson.
You'll be closer if you think about who was doing Radio Leeds' co-commentary last night. It was Bradley Johnson. So that's the era you're looking at.
The parity era.
Yeah, maybe a little bit earlier.
And links to Swansea?
I don't think so. Maybe links to Michael Duff.
Right.
Is probably how he's ended up there.
You're going to have to tell us. I think we're struggling here.
Yeah, okay. She's Dog. Big Alan Sheehan was up there getting quite... I don't think I'm giving too many secrets away if at one point there was an expression of dismay by a manoeuvre carried out by a certain Matthew Grimes. Fucking hell, Grimesy, I think was the thing that was generally... they were quite... they were a funny little crew because they were set up as two guys on laptops and then She's Dog is further down the gantry with a radio communicating with the bench. And he would kind of come over and they would all... I was too far away to really hear what they were saying apart from that's why I heard the Grimesy things, it was loud enough. And they kind of jab the screen of the laptop and go, and then he'd go away and you could hear him. It was like the teachers from Peens going down to the bench so that Mickey Duff would have his messages. And then
who is it? Matt Grimes' mum is just underneath, catches wind of this.
What are you saying about my lad?
What are you saying about my lad?
But he spent the second half down in the dugout. He was standing to the side of it,
Why
which was probably for the best.
She's Dog? Was there an
That's
old...
his Twitter name, was She's Dog 3.
that was it. I knew there was some reason for it.
Yeah, and it always... Because those were the early days when very few players were on Twitter and it was kind of a novelty. So when somebody stole Lloyd Sam's phone and put some moderately obscene messages out in his name, it was quite twee and it was quite nice. I was like, oh, isn't this funny, this medium? Whereas now, you're just hoping whenever a footballer tweets that it's not going to be some kind of horrendous statement of horror. But She's Dog was kind of a good early...
I'm surprised you didn't know that. But given that your handle's sexy_boy_69.
That's my email. You're confusing the two.
The Square Ball Podcast.